The Roman-Latin Wars were a series of wars fought between ancient Rome and the Latins, for the earliest stages of the history of Rome until the final subjugation of the Latins to Rome in the aftermath of the Latin War. First war with Rome. The Latins first went to war with Rome in the 7th century BC during the reign of the Roman king Ancus Marcius. According to Livy, the war was commenced by the Latins, who anticipated Ancus would follow the pious pursuit of peace adopted by his grandfather, Numa Pompilius. The Latins initially made an incursion on Roman lands. When a Roman embassy sought restitution for the damage, the Latins gave a contemptuous reply. Ancus accordingly declared war on the Latins. The declaration is notable since, according to Livy, it was the first time that the Romans had declared war by means of the rights of the Fetials. Ancus Marcius marched from Rome with a newly levied army and took the Latin town of Politorium by storm. Its residents were removed to settle on the Aventine Hill in Rome as new citizens, following the Roman traditions from wars with the Sabines and Albans. When the other Latins subsequently occupied the empty town of Politorium, Ancus took the town again and demolished it. Further citizens were removed to Rome when Ancus conquered the Latin towns of Teleni and Ficana. The war then focused on the Latin town of Medallia. The town had a strong garrison and was well fortified. Several engagements took place outside the town and the Romans were eventually victorious. Ancus returned to Rome with much booty. More Latins were brought to Rome as citizens and were settled at the foot of the Aventine near the Palatine Hill, by the Temple of Murcia. War with Rome under Tarquinius Priscus. When Rome was ruled by Lucius Tarquinius Priscus, the Latins went to war with Rome on 2 occasions. On the first, which according to the Fasti Triumphales occurred prior to 588 BC, Tarquinius took the Latin town of Appiale by storm, and from the brought back great booty to Rome. On the second occasion, Tarquinius subdued the entirety of Latium, and took a number of towns that belonged to the Latins which had revolted to them: Corniculum, Old Ficulalia, Camarilla, Crustumerium, Amerirola, Medallia and Nomentum, before agreeing to peace. War between Clusium and Aricia. In 5008 BC, Lars Porsena, king of Clusium, departed Rome after ending his war against Rome by peace treaty. Porsena split his forces, and sent part of the Clusian army with his son Aruns to besiege the Latin city of Aricia. The Aricians sent for assistance from the Latin League, and also from the Greek city of Cumae. When support arrived, the Arician army ventured beyond the walls of the city, and the combined armies met the Clusian forces in battle. According to Livy, the Clusians initially routed the Arician forces, but the Cumaean troops allowed the Clusians to pass by, then attacked from the rear, gaining victory against the Clusians. Livy says the Clusian army was destroyed. The Pometian Revolt. In 503 BC, 2 Latin towns, Pometia and Cora, said by Livy to be colonies of Rome, revolted against Rome. They had the assistance of the southern Aurunci tribe. Livy says that a Roman army led by the consuls Agrippa, Menenius Lenatus and Publius Postumius Tubertus met the enemy on the frontiers and was victorious, after which Livy says the war was confined to Pometia. Livy says many enemy prisoners were slaughtered by each side. Livy also says that the consuls celebrated a triumph. However, the Fasti Triumphales record that an ovation was celebrated by Postumius and a triumph by Menenius, both over the Sabines. In the following year the consuls were appointed Virginius and Sp. Cassius. Livy says that they attempted to take Pomatia by storm, but then resorted to siege engines. However, the Aurunci launched a successful sally, destroying the siege engines, wounding many, and nearly killing one of the consuls. The Romans retreated to Rome, recruited additional troops, and returned to Pomatia. They rebuilt the siege engines, and when they were about to take the town, the Pometians surrendered. The Aurunci leaders were beheaded, the Pometians sold into slavery, the town razed and the land sold. Livy says the consuls celebrated a triumph as a result of the victory. The Fasti Triumphales record only one triumph by Cassius, the Battle of Lake Regulus in the Foedus Cassianum. In 501 BC word reached Rome that 30 of the Latin cities had joined in league against Rome, at the instigation of Octavius Mamilius of Tusculum. Because of this, Titus Lartius was appointed as Rome's first dictator, with Spurius Cassius as his magister equitum. However, war with the Latins did not come to pass until at least 2 years later. In 499 BC, or possibly 496 BC, war broke out. At first Fidenae was besieged, Crustumerium was captured, and Prioness defected to the Romans. Aulus Postumius was appointed dictator, with Titus Ebucius Elva as his magister equitum. With the Roman army, they marched into the Latin territory and were victorious at the Battle of Lake Regulus. Shortly afterwards, in 495 BC, the Latins resisted calls from the Volsci to join with them to attack Rome, and went so far as to deliver the Volscian ambassadors to Rome. The Roman Senate, in gratitude, granted freedom to 6,000 Latin prisoners, and in return the Latins sent a crown of gold to the temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus in Rome. A great crowd formed, including the freed Latin prisoners, who thanked their captors. Great bonds of friendship were said to have arisen between the Romans and the Latins as a result of this event. The Latins also warned Rome of the Volscian invasion, which occurred shortly after in the same year. In 493 a treaty, the Foedus Cassianum, was concluded, establishing a mutual military alliance between the Latin cities with Rome as the leading partner. A second people, the Hernici, joined the alliance sometime later. While the precise workings of the Latin League remains uncertain, its overall purpose seems clear. During the 5th century the Latins were threatened by invasion from the Equi and the Volsci, as part of a larger pattern of Sabellian-speaking peoples migrating out of the Apennines and into the plains. Several peripheral Latin communities appear to have been overrun, and the ancient sources record fighting against either the Equi, the Volsci, or both almost every year during the first half 5th century. This annual warfare would have been dominated by raids and counter-raids rather than the pitched battles described by the ancient sources. Defection of the Latins from Rome. In 390 a Gaulish warband first defeated the Roman army at the Battle of the Allia and then sacked Rome. According to Livy, the Latins and Hernici, after 100 years of loyal friendship with Rome, used this opportunity to break the treaty with Rome in 389. In his narrative of the years that followed, Livy describes a steady deterioration of relations between Rome and the Latins. In 387 the situation with Latins and Hernici was brought up in the Roman Senate, but the matter was dropped when news reached Rome that Etruria was in arms. In 386 the Antiates invaded the Pomptine territory, and it was reported in Rome that the Latins had sent warriors to assist them. The Latins claimed they had not sent aid to the Antiates, but had not prohibited individuals from volunteering for such service. A Roman army under Marcus Furius Camillus and P. Valerius Potitus Poplicola met the Antiates at Satricum. In addition to Volscians, the Antiates had brought a large number of Latins and Hernicans to the field. In the battle that followed, the Romans were were victorious and the Volscians were slaughtered in great number. The Latins and Hernicans now abandoned the Volscians, and Satricum fell to Camillus. The Romans demanded to know from the Latins and Hernici why for the last few years' wars they had not furnished any contingents. They claimed not to have been able to supply troops due to fear of Volscian incursions. The Roman Senate considered this defense to be insufficient, but that time was not right for war. In 385 the Romans appointed Aulus Cornelius Cossus dictator to deal with the Volscian War. The dictator marched his army into the Pomptine territory, which he had heard was being invaded by the Volscians. The Volscian army was once again swelled by Latins and Hernici, including contingents from the Roman colonies of Circari and Velitrae, and in the battle that followed the Romans were once again victorious. The majority of the captives are found to be Hernici and Latins, including men of high rank, which the Romans take as proof that the states are formally assisting the Volscians. However, the sedition of Marcus Manlius Capitolinus prevented Rome from declaring war on the Latins. When the Latins, Hernici, and the colonists of Circari and Velitrae tried to persuade the Romans to release those of the countrymen who had been made prisoner, they were refused. That same year Satricum was colonized with 2,000 Roman citizens, each to receive 2.5 acres of land. Some modern historians have questioned Livy's portrayal of the Latins as rebelling from Rome. Cornell believes that there was no armed uprising of Latins. Rather, the military alliance between Rome and the other Latin towns seems to have been allowed to wither. In the preceding decades, Rome had grown considerably in power, especially with the conquest of Verit, and the Romans might now have preferred freedom of action to the obligations of the alliance. Also, several Latin towns appear to have remained allied to Rome. Based on later events, these would have included at least Tusculum and Lanuvium, to which Cornell adds Aricia, Lavinium and Ardea. The colonies of Circari and Velitrae are likely to have remained partly inhabited by Volsci, which helps explain the rebellion. But these two settlements, more than any other Latin towns, would have felt vulnerable to Rome's aggressive designs for the Pomptine region. Division among the Latins is also the stance taken by Oakley, who substantially accept Cornell's analysis. The continued loyalty of Ardea, Aricia, Gabii, Labicum, Lanuvium and Lavinium would help explain how Roman armies could operate in the Pomptine region. In the writings on the early Roman Republic, Livy and Dionysius of Halicarnassus often mention men from states formerly at peace with Rome fighting in the armies of Rome's enemies in a private capacity, though this might genuinely reflect Italic warfare of this era. Livy appears here to be using it as a literary motif to bring continuity to his narrative of the 380s. War between Rome and Praenest. In the last years of the 380s, Praenest emerged as the leading Latin city in opposition to Rome. In terms of territory, Praenest was the third largest city in Latium, but between 499 and 383 Praenest is wholly absent from the sources, and much of the fighting against the Equi by Rome and the Latin League appear to have taken place to the south of her territory. Modern historians have therefore proposed that Praenest was overrun, or at least came to some kind of understanding with the Equi. If this was the case, Praenest would not have been part of the Latin League for most of the 5th century. The end of the Equine Threat by the early 4th century freed Praenest to move against Rome. Outbreak. Livy records that in 383 Lanuvium, which had so far been loyal to Rome, rebelled. In Rome, on the advice of the Senate, the tribes unanimously declared for war on Velitrae after 5 commissioners have been appointed to distribute the Pomptine territory and 3 to settle a colony at Nepet. However, there was pestilence in Rome throughout the year and no campaign was launched. Among the revolting colonists, a peace party was in favor of asking Rome for pardon, but the war party continued to hold the population's favor and a raid was launched into Roman territory, effectively ending all talk of peace. There was also a rumor that Prienest had revolted, and the peoples of Tusculum, Gabii and Labici complained that their territories had been invaded, but the Roman Senate refused to believe these charges. In 382, consular tribunes Sp. and L. Papirius marched against Velatrae, the four colleagues being left to defend Rome. The Romans defeated the Velatanian army, which included a large number of Praenestine auxiliaries, but refrained from storming the place, doubting whether a storm would be successful and not wanting to destroy the colony. Based on the report of the tribunes, Rome declared war on Praenest. Of all the old Latin towns, Lanuvium was closest to Pomptine Plain. It is therefore no surprise that she now joined the struggle against Rome. Rumors of wars about to break out are common in Livy's writings, but of doubtful historicity. Such rumors would have been easy inventions for the annalists seeking to bring life to the narratives. However, some of them may be based on authentic records. If this is the case here, it may represent an attempt by Prienest to win over the Latin cities still loyal to Rome, while the details provided by Livy for the campaign of 382 are plausible. The original records likely only stated there was fighting against Prienest and Velatrae. Livy and Plutarch provide parallel narratives for 381. In that year the Volsci and Praenestines are said to have joined forces and, according to Livy, successfully stormed the Roman colony of Satricum. In response, the Romans elected M. Furius Camillus as consular tribune for the sixth time. Camillus was assigned the Volscian War by special senatorial decree. His fellow tribune L. Furius Medullinus was chosen by lot to be his colleague in this undertaking. There are some differences between Livy and Plutarch in their accounts of the campaign that followed. According to Livy, the tribunes marched out from the Esquiline Gate for Satricum with an army of 4 legions, each consisting of 4,000 men. At Satricum they met an army considerably superior in number and eager for battle. Camillus, however, refused to engage the enemy, seeking instead to protract the war. This exasperated his colleague, L. Furius, who claimed that Camillus had become too old and slow and soon won over the whole army to his side. While his colleague prepared for battle, Camillus formed a strong reserve and awaited the outcome of the battle. The Volsci started to retire soon after the battle had started, and, as they had planned, the Romans were drawn in to follow up the rising ground toward the Volscian camp. Here the Volsci had placed several cohorts in reserve and these joined the battle. Fighting uphill against superior numbers, the Romans started to flee. However, Camillus brought up the reserves and rallied the fleeing soldiers to stand their ground. With the infantry wavering, the Roman cavalry, now led by L. Furius, dismounted and attacked the enemy on foot. As a result, the Volsci were defeated and fled in panic. Their camp was also taken. A large number of Volsci were killed and an even larger number taken prisoners. According to Plutarch, a sick Camillus was waiting in the camp while his colleague engaged the enemy. When he heard that Roman had been routed, he sprung from his couch, rallied the soldiers and stopped the enemy pursuit. Then on the second day Camillus led his forces out, defeated the enemy in battle and took the camp. Camillus then learned that Satricum had been taken by Etruscans and all the Roman colonists were slaughtered. He sent the bulk of his forces back to Rome, while he and the youngest men fell upon the Etruscans and expelled them from Satricum. Of the two versions of this battle that have been preserved, Plutarch's is thought to be closer to the earlier annalists than that of Livy. Notably, Livy presents a more noble picture of Camillus than Plutarch. He has also compressed all the fighting into one day rather than two. That the Praenestine should have joined with the Volsci at Satricum and been defeated by Camillus is credible enough. However, most, if not all, the details surrounding the battle, including the supposed quarrel between Camillus and L. Furius, are today considered to be later inventions. Especially the scale of the battle and the Roman victory have been vastly exaggerated. Roman annexation of Tusculum. Having described Camillus's victory against the Volsci, Livy and Plutarch moves on to a conflict with Tusculum. According to Livy, Camillus found Tusculans among the prisoners taken in the battle against the Volscians. Camillus brought these back to Rome, and after prisoners had been examined, war was declared on Tusculum. According to Plutarch, Camillus had just returned to Rome with the spoils when it was reported that the Tusculans were about to rebel. The conduct of the war was entrusted to Camillus, who chose L. Furius as his colleague. Tusculum, however, offered no resistance whatsoever. When Camillus entered the city, he found everyone going about their daily life as if there was no war. Camillus ordered the leading men of Tusculum to go to Rome and plead the case. This they did with the dictator of Tusculum as the spokesman. The Romans granted Tusculum peace, and not long after full citizenship. By 381, Tusculum was almost surrounded by Roman territory, and her annexation was a logical step for Rome. Besides increasing Roman territory and manpower, this had the additional benefit of separating Tibur and Praenest from the cities on the Alban Hills. Tusculum became the first Roman municipium, a self-governing city of Roman citizens. Some modern historians have argued that this episode has been invented or is a retrojection of later events. Cornell, Oakley and Forsyth accept the incorporation of Tusculum in 381 as historical. Livy and other later writers portrayed the annexation of Tusculum as a benevolent act, but this view more properly reflects their own times, when Roman citizenship was highly sought after. In the 4th century, when the Latin cities struggled to maintain independence from Rome, it would have been seen as an aggressive act. Later events reveal that Tusculum was not yet firmly in Roman hands. In the Roman period, the chief magistrates of Tusculum had the title of aedile, but it is possible, as Livy claims, that in 381 Tusculum was governed by a dictator. Dictatorship of T. Quinctius Cincinnatus. Livy provides the only full narrative for 380. After a failed census in Rome, the plebeian tribunes started agitating for debt relief and obstructed the enrollment of fresh legions for the war against Praenest. Not even the news that the Praenestines had advanced into the district of Gabii deterred the tribunes. Learning that Rome had no army in the field, the Praenestine army pushed on until it stood before the Colline Gate. Alarmed, the Romans appointed T. Quinctius Cincinnatus as dictator, with A. Sempronius Atratinus as his master of the horse, and assembled the army. In response, the Praenestines withdrew to the Allia, where they set up camp, hoping that memories of their earlier defeat against the Gauls at the same place would cause dread among the Romans. The Romans, however, recalled the previous victories against the Latins and relished the chance of wiping out previous defeats. The dictator ordered A. Sempronius to charge the Praenestine center with the cavalry. The dictator would then attack the disordered enemy with the legions. The Praenestines broke at the first charge. In the panic, they abandoned the camp, the flight not stopping until they were within sight of Praenest. At first unwilling to abandon the countryside to the Romans, the Praenestines established a second camp. But on the arrival of the Romans, this second camp was also abandoned, and the Praenestines retreated behind the walls of the city. The Romans first captured captured 8 towns subordinated to Praenest and then marched on Velitrae, which was stormed. When the Roman army arrived before Praenest, the Praenestines surrendered, having defeated the enemy in battle and captured 2 camps and 9 towns. Titus Quinctius returned to Rome in triumph, carrying with him from Praenest a statue of Jupiter Imperator. This statue was set up on the Capitol between the shrines of Jupiter and Minerva with the inscription, Jupiter and all the gods granted that the dictator Titus Quinctius should capture 9 towns. Titus Quinctius laid down his office on the 20th day after his appointment. According to D.H. and Festus, the 9 towns were captured in 9 days. Festus further adds that Quinctius captured Praenest on the 10th and dedicated a golden crown weighing 2 1/3 of a pound. D.S. also records a Roman victory in battle against the Praenestines in this year, but does not provide any details. According to Livy, the next year, 379, the Praenestines renewed hostilities by instigating revolts among the Latins. However, apart from this notice, Praenest is not mentioned again in the sources until 358. Modern historians generally accept the core of Livy's account of Titus Quinctius' dictatorship and its dating to 380. Thus that he captured 9 towns subordinated to Praenest and forced the Praenestines to sue for peace is considered historical. Oakley also believes Quinctius' victory in pitched battle could be historical, and maybe also his capture of Velitrae as well. No fighting is reported against Velitrae until 369, but this could also be a later invention. However, the claims that the Praenestines marched on Rome via Gabii and the placement of the battle at the Allia are very doubtful historicity. With regards to the discrepancies between Livy and Festus, Oakley believes that Festus, while mistaken when claiming that Praenest was stormed, was correct in stating that Quinctius dedicated a crown rather than more magnificently brought back a statue from Praenest. Titus Quinctius Flamininus is said to have brought back a statue of Jupiter from Macedonia after his victories in the Second Macedonian War 2 centuries later, and these two events have become then confused. This view is accepted by Forsyth. Forsyth considers Quinctius Cincinnatus's inscription to be origin of the more famous, but in Forsyth's view fictitious, story of Lucius Quinctius Cincinnatus's dictatorship and victory against the Equi in 458 BC.